Welcome to another episode of the BS Podcast, the show that looks at how behavioural change insights are being applied in the wild. Episodes feature renowned behavioural experts across industries and organisations, from management and marketing to policy and public health, and more. Let's dive in and see what all the BS is about. Here's your host from The Behaviourist, Nick Hobson.
Hello, BS listeners, and welcome back to another episode. And today's episode is a bit of a special one, a new one. It's the very first of what's shaping up to become a new subchapter within the BS podcast series. And so here the goal is to focus on cutting edge new products and services that are behavioral based, behavioral inspired, and designed, developed, created with psychology and behavioral science in mind, if you will. And so it's not just me talking about these new product offerings in the market, because I think that would be pretty boring, but rather it's a sit down with the people and the masterminds behind these new products. And so today we kick off what I think I'm calling officially the BS buzz in the market with the app Pique, and that is spelled Pique. And so I'm really excited to have Beck Weeks, Sindel Mullainathan. Sorry, I'm mispronouncing that. Can you correct me on that one?
Mullainathan.
Thank you. And Mike Norton. So Beck Weeks, just a bit of bio on background on each of our guests. Beck Weeks is one of the co-founders of Pique. Prior to founding Pique, Beck was a senior advisor for BETA, the behavioral economics team of Australia. She's also a visiting fellow at Harvard University and research affiliate at MIT Media Lab. Sindel is the Roman Family University professor of computation and behavioral science at Chicago Booth. His current research uses machine learning to understand complex problems in human behavior, social policy, and medicine. Mike Norton is the Harold M. Brearley Professor of Business Administration at Harvard Business School and a member of Harvard's Behavioral Insights Group, or BIG. So, Pique team, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Nick.
Great to be here. Thanks.
And I should say, Mike, welcome back, because some listeners, you might remember that Mike was episode 1 of the BS podcast. And here's the show almost exactly 1 year later, and Mike has made a return. So you must have had a good time.
This can be your new second lowest rated episode after my first episode. So we can...
You know what? I'm actually going to hold back, and I was actually going to say something about the stats, but your ego's big enough there, Mike. I think I think I'll hold back on that one. So, as I said, this is the first of a series, and I'd prefer that you guys do most of the talking. But what I will do is just very quickly introduce Pique and what it is. So, Pique is a quirky, funny behavioral scientist in your pocket. I love that. So it's a mobile app that shows you the behavioral science behind common issues in your day-to-day life and helps you to approach the issues in new ways. So there's lots more to it, but what I like is that there's these sort of moments, and in each moment it's crafted to be engaging and maybe even, and this is in the words of the co-founders here, make you giggle. So when I was going through the beta and just exploring and poking around the app, I'm pretty sure I laughed out loud a few times. So my first question for you, Pique team, is who's the real comedian behind this, and where do all these funny little jokes come from?
That is a great question. Who's going to claim it, guys?
I think the writers.
I think what's really nice is, I think hopefully, all of us have a bit of a sense of humor, which is why we quite like hanging out and working on this together. It makes it one of the most fun things to work on for me in my career so far. But we all have a slightly different sense of humor too, and I think you'll probably notice that in the app there's kind of the Mike moments and the Sindel moments and the Beck moments, and we, as Mike said too, we've got great writers who work on it with us as well, and you'll see their flair come into it. And there's a little bit of something for everyone. A little piece of each of us is in there.
That's a very political answer. So I want to hear Sindel and Mike. I want to hear that's true.
I'm still reeling from you calling us masterminds, Nick. I've never been called a mastermind of anything. This is just a good moment. Yeah, this is great. I hadn't worked out my evil laugh yet, but I guess I wasn't quite prepared. Um, I don't think that's a political answer. I think let me give my own personal answer, which is I remember a long time ago, about 10 years ago, having this realization that wherever you are in life, when you look around and look at the faces of people around you, 99% of the time, they look like they're at a funeral. It's as if people have decided humor is just not an appropriate thing in regular life.
In
Which is a
fairness, Sendel was an undertaker 10 years ago, so it doesn't really apply for most people. But as an analogy, I think it's still pretty solid, Sendel.
So I think that I wouldn't say that there's. Well, first of all, we should just, we went and got writers, um, that we have had a ton of humor to it, but I think the spirit that there needs to be humor in it really did come from all of us, and I think it reflects a deeper perspective on people. That is, I think there is a way to look at psychology and the great psychology experiments as acts of the absurd. You look at any of these psychology experiments, they have a bit of a play in them. And the play is bringing out an aspect of life, which is what humor does. You look at it and you're like, oh my God, I never saw it that way before. And it's not unreasonable if you really let your mind go. Actually, some of these experiments are worthy of laughter because they have the same insight of great humor. So I think that it's not coincidental that there's humor here. Is that the second philosophical thing is that learning to take yourself not at all seriously is, I think, an essential piece of change.
That's great. And I will say, just to walk back in memory lane, as a young graduate student, PhD student, a number of years ago, I was surrounded by all of those funeral attending academics, and then I met Mike, and I was like, "What? There's this guy at Harvard Business School who's actually quite funny." So I'm glad to see something like this, and it seems like it's not just haphazard, but there was actually some sort of thought that went into it, and that humor can actually be this really engaging tool to get people involved and to get them, to get that buy-in. So how about we dive in a little bit to Pique and to what it is? So I explained it, very briefly. But can you tell us and tell listeners what it is, what it's meant to do, why they should download it?
I think this would be a really good exercise, almost back to this idea of there's a little bit of each of us. I'd love to hear each of us, and maybe I can throw first to Mike, talk about what we think Pique is. And let's just do a little experiment here. Mike, what is Pique?
Well, as we mentioned, it's geared toward morticians and people in that space more broadly. Or if you're just interested in death, I suppose it doesn't have to be a professional. So for me, I think one of the things that I had as the spirit of Pique was thinking about how little kids see the world, which is just like mind blown at all moments by the most, in our mind, because we're old and stupid, mundane things like ice could be a 12-hour journey of amazingness for a 5-year-old. And we're like, oh, I don't like ice, I fell on it. So just this idea that the world is actually super interesting. Your own brain is super interesting if you think about it. Other people's brains are super interesting. Even the people you know the best, they're still super interesting and you don't know everything about them. And so there was that idea of wonder that I think all three of us resonated with, of not wonder like go to the Grand Canyon, it's amazing, although you should, it's cool, but like wonder in everyday life. If we could bring it back a little bit, that would, it's such an amazing feeling when you're feeling wonder, if we could bring it back a little bit. So that, for me, that was one of the animating principles.
For me, Mike's taken the wonder comment, but let me add my second part. The wonder thing does a lot for me. The second piece that I think does a lot for me is that when you look at a lot of behavioral science out there, it makes you it sets you up for failure. And here's why. It's very monotonous. It's like, we're going to help you go to the gym every day or every 3 days a week or whatever. We're going to help you do this thing. And then after you've gotten this app to get you to say that's what you want to do, I'm going to meditate every day. And like a week later, you don't end up doing it. You just feel bad for yourself. But I don't think you should feel bad for yourself. I think you should actually realize the reason you stop doing it many times is because you're bored. The human mind doesn't like monotony. That's not a bad thing. That is a good thing. It's what makes the mind truly amazing. And so one of the animating principles for me, and I guess this relates to wonder, is there is so many amazing things in the world, so many ways that you can grow as a human being. There's no reason for you doggedly to monotonously try to do one thing again and again. And there are many paths of growth that can happen in 2 minutes. In fact, if you look at some eye-opening moments in your life, many of them happened in a minute or so. And so the second goal here is, let's try and create these eye-opening moments. Look, 4 out of 5 may not do much, but even if 1 out of 5, it's just 2 minutes of your life. 1 out of 5 has that moment for you. And so this notion that the sort of diversity and not being monotonous and kind of constantly encountering interesting new things, for me, was sort of very, very motivating.
And Beck?
I'll add one last idea into this mix, which is the idea of the importance of doing things. I think we've had that experience where you've read a really great article about a new study that's come out, and it seems like, what a fascinating insight, how I would love to be able to incorporate that finding into my life in some meaningful way, and then you forget about it and you get on with your life, and it leaves zero impact. And so I think we wanted to find a way that we could make it easy and fun for people to actually live some of these insights in a way that helps them work on lots of dimensions. As Sendil said, it's not just coming back to do a gratitude practice. It's maybe that's some element of what we're doing today, but tomorrow it's something completely different. And that, I think, is something that makes Pique really different. It's not just one thing. The one thing that it is kind of helping you be human, but that is a lot of things. And I think that the focus on doing things is super important to us as well.
I think, and just following quickly on what both Beck and Sendel said, one of our things is you can't fail at Pique, because if you try meditation and you hate it, well, that's something you learned about yourself. It's not a bad thing. Or if you try one of our moments and you hate it, that would kind of suck for us, but that's okay. It means you're not interested in working on emotional intelligence right now. You're interested in working on something else. And a lot of learning about yourself is learning what you don't like. So I think we really wanted to design around that as well, which is if you don't like to exercise every single day, it'd be nice if you did, but you don't. Some people do. So,
and building on what another element is, I love that phrase, helping you be human. I've often been troubled by this fact that
By trying to be human.
Trying to be human. Actually, yeah, it does trouble me, and I think
because you have gills.
Yeah, well, hey, they're helpful sometimes.
Yeah.
When the ship sinks, don't come crying to me. The thing that I find is, you receive how many years of education, 16, 20 years, God knows how many years you're sitting in school. But no one ever teaches you what it means to be a person. It's kind of tragic. And there's so many parts of being a person that are just befuddling or complicated. Sometimes it's about interacting with other people, but even just knowing what you are. I'll give an example. I distinctly remember the I don't know when the date was, but I remember the feeling when I was it was a day when I was younger, but it was a day when everyone was bothering me. I was the people I were encountering were super annoying. They were I don't know why, so that day I was encountering a lot of annoying people. And then partway through the day, I said to myself, wait a second, they're not annoying. I'm just tired. And that happened at a relatively young age, but someone could have taught me that, like, hey, there is this thing. I had to learn it myself. Until then, I was just rude to people because I was like, whatever. And there's so many parts of being human. I like the way you put it, Beck. So many parts of being human that are just inherently hard.
So do you guys have, I love that. I actually, Sendel, I gave a response to an interview a few weeks back, and they said, like, how do you incorporate behavioral science or psychology into your own life? And I said, well, I studied affect and emotions and in grad school, and sort of this key distinction between integral and incidental affect. So what you were explaining is really that it's like, I feel like shit for some reason, and I'm not sure exactly why. You know, we're terrible at appraising the real source of our emotions, as we know. And then I go home and like kick my dog and yell at my wife, or, you know, scold my children unnecessarily. I think the majority of the population, and I guess this fits into emotional intelligence, they don't have that introspective ability. So is Pique there to do that? To is this one example of a moment? You call them moments. Is this one example of a moment that's good help the user?
Yeah, and just to illustrate, I love the way the integral versus incidental. It's like we should even that distinction. Now, imagine reading that distinction. This harkens back to something Beck said. You hear that distinction. You, the listener, are hearing it right now, and in this moment, it may feel useful to you, and you say, "I'm going to go and do something about it." The challenge for us in creating moments is to take the insight, but instead of explaining the insight to the user, create a little experience for them in those 2 minutes, so that they don't hear the insight, so that they experience the insight. And then we say, what you just experienced was incidental versus, I'm missing the word now, but what you just heard, what you just learned was this effect. And then we kind of go on to it. And so for us, I mean, for me, the real fun has been flipping the entire script. Rather than thinking about writing the idea down or the theory down in words, asking, how do you recreate this experience for somebody? And so that they feel it. And I think because once you've felt it yourself in an experience, it's embodied in you, and you know it.
Yeah, we often talk about trying to create the aha experience for a user. Like, what will be the way that we get them not just to think, oh yeah, cool concept, but to think, oh my gosh, that's what I was feeling, or that's what I was noticing, or I see what they're talking about when they, I see how this applies in my own life. And if a moment hasn't yet got an aha, it's not a moment yet. We're back to the drawing board.
One of the moments that I have been so excited about in the beginning, and I think Beck and Sendel were like, I guess we should design this because he keeps going on and on about it, was this idea that we would ask you, how are you feeling right now? And we'd give you like 5 basic emotions, and then you would click one, but then as soon as you clicked one, it would explode into like 30 varieties of that emotion. And then you had to pick that one. That was the first thing, was just like, you're not feeling angry. That's not just what you're feeling, it's deeper. And then the next part was that you would do it with your partner, so that you would guess what the other person was feeling right then by tapping your phone, and just show how enormously wrong you are about how your partner is feeling, and how enormously wrong they are about how you're feeling. So it's exactly what are emotions? How can we know our emotions better? But ideally, it's just a little extra, do something with somebody else and get a little more, hopefully, punch out of it.
Yeah, great. I love that. So many questions floating around my head right now. I guess the one I'll go to is, we always love to hear, or at least I do. I love to hear founder stories, and here we are, and sort of right at this moment for the three of you. So, what was that initial interaction? What was that first conversation, and then how did it lead from there to today, to what Pique is today?
As the mastermind, why don't I take this? So there were 2 separate conversations I distinctly remember having, one with Mike and one with Beck. With Mike, I remember in Cafe Crema in Harvard Square, sitting with Mike and having this conversation around self-help is a huge market. Lots of people demand it, but it is shockingly taboo in academic psychology. Like, you wouldn't go to your fellow academic and be like, I'm doing self-help. In fact, if they said, oh, you're working on self-help, that's like an insult. and not even like a sort of a hidden one. It's a pretty transparent insult, which reflects something very deep. The fact that there's such a demand for self-help says something awesome to me. It means many, many, many people are looking to make themselves better in some way. And there's few things more inspirational than that. Like, people are trying to grow. That's awesome. Second, it says, well, what's happened that in psychology who have this huge body of evidence that simply the knowledge of that evidence could help people grow. Why have we, cordoned it off? So that was one conversation Mike and I had. And with Beck, she and I remember talking around, we at that point were building a different app together. And I remember talking around, but there's so much interesting behavioral science. The app we had didn't have much. And she was pushing, can't we do something much more and take the core principles of behavioral science? So on the basis of these two, all I did was intersect and say, here, you guys should meet each other. And then I'll just sit back and take my 10%. And so that's what I've done so far. I mean, I think it's 10, right? Let's just make that clear.
We're just, trying to dilute you every day, Sendel.
the real founder story. It's gonna be like a movie made in like 20 years, right? Like Zuckerberg, and
that's right.
That's great. So and when was that? You might have mentioned that, Sendel, but I could have missed it.
At this age, I'm not sure time has any more meaning, Nick. I know it was 2018. So we've been working on it for the last 18 months or so. Speaking of time not having any meaning, if you'll humor me, Mike mentioned there's a lot of emotional things. There is also a bunch of moments that I really love that we have around time. And I'll tease with this, which is, like, you asked the question, so it reminded me of it, of like how malleable time is. Like, some days can seem like forever, especially when it's like these guys are forced to talk to me. Some days can be like seem really slow. Some weeks can seem, and so we have a few moments around the malleability of time and the psychophysics of it, which in the COVID period is something that is eminently sort of amongst the most important things that at least I've noticed psychologically that's changed in my own head.
Another super fun aspect of time, it just reminds me that one of the things we get to do as part of Pique is talk to super smart behavioral scientists and figure out what they're working on, and then see if we can incorporate some of their stuff. And so our latest one actually is with my colleague at HBS, Ashley Willens, who has here's a plug, a new book called Time Smart coming out pretty soon. And so we're working with her to develop moments based on some of the principles that she's onto in Pique. And then the nice thing about that is then we don't have to have any ideas of any kind. We can just leverage the intelligence of other people. And I think I get 11% is my understanding.
Well, to be fair, 10 and 11% of 0 are still the same number. So I think, at some level, it's fine.
The ratio of unicorns to leprechauns.
So, and that's one thing that that really stands out is, I guess, the translation, because scientists and academics, we just love to, and I hope I don't offend anyone here, but sort of just navel gaze and theorize and wax poetic. But this is really taking the insights from psychology, social psychology, and behavioral science, and translating them into practice. So, why do you think that's the case, and why is it? Is this sort of the next wave of the intersection of applied social psychology?
Of applying them in a more practical setting, or in a...
Yeah. Like, it seems like the academics just sort of live in their ivory towers for some of them, not all of them. But
we had to.
This is a huge opportunity for you to make fun of us. Just make fun of us, Beck. I mean, it's just this perfect setup for how stupid we are.
These two can't dress themselves. It's a real struggle to it's. I think it comes back, I guess, to what, in this particular concept. It's funny that despite the number of insights in the field of psychology that could be helpful in a self-help realm, that self-help kind of was this dirty phrase, and yet bringing these insights and applying them and helping people apply them in a really practical way is, I think, where you can really help people. And I think, I don't know, Sendel, do you have any thoughts about, have you been shunned? Do people not want to invite you to seminars anymore.
The before after design is hard to tell because I was already shunned before. So
Yeah.
it's I think actually. So here's the thing, Nick, that I've learned from this experience, which Beck, you can speak to a little bit. Is as Mike mentioned, we've had brainstorming sessions with academics, and at first we did it a little bit sheepishly. We haven't done many of them, and mainly with our friends. And I think it's fair to say they've loved them,
Mhm.
and let me argue why I think they've loved them. Because ultimately, psychology is a beautifully applied discipline. It's the act of writing the paper and writing the abstract that forces you into this sort of ethereal world. But the living of thinking up psychological insights is so embodied in the world you live in that these 2-hour brainstorming sessions were just such a delight because it freed up all these minds who love to think about psychology to the task of, I got my inspiration from the world. How do I put it back in the world?
Mhm.
So I think if I were to be more ambitious, I do think this could reflect in some way a change that's coming. I do think psychologists are starting to feel, wow, a different interaction with the world around me could make my research better, and I can do something in the world.
Nick, can you bring in surprise guests to the podcast who have done these brainstorming sessions with us and see how much they hated it?
Yeah, that'd
It would be an awesome reveal. Well, here's Ashley Willens. She hates you.
That's season 3. Season 3, folks.
Yeah.
I mean, I genuinely, not to sort of toot our own horn here, but I remember people leaving we had one in Chicago. This is well before before COVID, in the before times. But they, I'm not going to drop a name here. It was his birthday, and he came to that session and said it was one of the most fun things he had done in a long time. And this is an academic, in the Chicago land area. And I couldn't agree more. We all had a great time. There was just the freedom to say, let's just think of the concepts that we love the most. How can we put them, as Sendel said, put them back in the real world? How can we help people feel these things and actually help people understand them more in a context that makes sense for them?
Yeah, and it reminds me of, and I said this on a number of times in past episodes. There was an APA president, American Psychological Association president, in 1969 or 1970, and in his address, I think it's George Homans was his name, and I think the name of the address, which is now in print, is called "We Have to Give Psychology Away." So to back into Sendel, your point, like, of all the sciences that we have, like psychology or behavioral science, it ought to be. It's sort of our responsibility and duty as practitioners and scientists and researchers and product designers, in order to, to give the insights away. It's just such a shame for those insights to be kept secret from the people, especially when it's like taxpayers' dollars who are paying these academics, right, folks?
It sounds to me like if you say we have to give psychology away, it's like it's so worthless that nobody will pay for it. our only option is to give it. It's like a couch that's stinky. We got to give it away. No, nobody's going to pay for this couch. Is that what he meant?
That's great.
Maybe people have misinterpreted his whole point.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I hate this field. It's a joke.
We got to burn it down.
Yeah, exactly.
Nick, what would you like to see as a moment if you could see something come to life in the app?
Oh gosh, this might quickly turn into a therapy session, so I hope you guys are okay with that. This is going to be a free therapy session, right? Well, I did hear whispers that there was some elements of ritual that were in there or going to make their way in there, and of course, Mike and I know each other from our work and are still collaborate on projects related to ritual. It was my entire PhD dissertation, so I would love to hear more about these ritual moments and how you guys are thinking about incorporating them into Pique.
So the work that Nick and I did together was about people hating other people because they had different rituals, which is not our top of mind ritual to implement in the app because we don't want to increase hate. But we, although that would be a different, probably very successful app now that I think about it.
Yeah.
I
Anyway,
think there are other apps that do that already. Yeah.
there may be. I think the internet is one of them.
Yeah.
Do you remember we had a reverse Friday
Oh
or Freaky
yeah.
Friday, where on that
Oh,
day
yeah.
we had a set of moments where everything was reversed, so it would try to make you unhappy. It would try to make you hate people, because there's something insightful about the thing that makes you hate people as well, right? So anyway, sorry, keep going, Mike.
Yeah. So the ritual, I mean, if you think about where we use rituals in life, two big ones are when we're nervous about doing something, and also when we're like trying to get started on work or leave work behind, kind of how do we transition there? And both of those are moments where if you ask people, do you do little things? They say like, yeah, I actually do. Like before I have to do a podcast, I do this little, like I make sure my pens are all lined up or whatever it is that people do. In your case, it's probably to groom your mustache, Nick. I'm not sure what your ritual is. But the idea is to encourage people, if they don't have them, to come up with them. So literally in the app, you can sort of swipe through some examples and say like, oh, that one might be kind of cool for me. And then we'll have you write it down just quickly. And then we can ping it back at you. So like if you tell us, you know what, on Friday, I'm super nervous about something, then if the meeting starts at noon, we can ping you at 11:55 and say, don't forget to do your little mustache cleansing thing. And then hopefully we can help you out. So they're not rituals like, sacrifice an animal ritual. We mean the little tiny things that we all do that can help us with like small things in life. But when we do them, they really do help us. So we should do more of them.
And I think right now, while so many of us have lost things that used to be rituals in our day to day, but may not have realized that we saw them as rituals, I think helping people think about even things like your commute time. Did you used to actually treat that in a fairly ritualistic way where you spent time maybe even just staring out the window of the train while you mentally got into the headspace of what you had to do that day, preparing for the day? That could have been a very important ritual, which a lot of people, now that we're not commuting, most of us, have lost. And so what can we learn from that about how we could build little rituals? Maybe now it's, what can you do between walking from that corner of the bedroom to the opposite corner where you work? But it could be as simple as, okay, I'm developing a ritual around, I'm going to switch from my, sleeping sweatshirt to my work sweatshirt. It's time to put that work sweatshirt on. But
Like
just
putting
whatever it
pants
is,
on
and I mean,
just once.
yeah,
That's my new
Yeah.
one. Yeah, like I'm wearing pants like for at least half the day. That's my
yeah, the power of pants.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. It's not. It's how you imbue that, right? These are the special pants, or even just pants. Pants are special, and helping people see the power of that and set that up for themselves, and then us helping them to remind them, hey, it's pants time.
Mhm.
I think the
even
downside is it might lead to some like divorces and stuff as people start going on and on about their power pants and things. But on an individual level, I think it's probably going to be fairly helpful.
I wanted to pause also on the one thing you mentioned, Beck, which is I think people aren't fully aware that one of the sense of loss they feel from the COVID period is the loss of rituals. Like it was many things that you've lost you knew to name, but rituals are so basic that I'm just repeating what you said, Beck, but you've lost it without realizing it, and so you may feel a hole. And just even the exercise of going back and saying, wait, what are the rituals I lost? Exactly as you just said, Beck, could be a very cathartic experience.
Mhm. Mhm.
I just want to use
Excellent.
the word cathartic.
Yeah. It was a
That
really
was on
good.
Sendel's bingo card for this call. Well done.
Sandals are raconteur.
Yeah.
I actually just wanted to use the word raconteur.
Well, now we're just throwing around
I
fancy
didn't know you
words.
knew Latin.
So what I've heard on a couple of occasions now, this 2 minutes, that time frame, is that a sort of rule that's built in the app? But like, what is the time commitment, if there is a commitment at all from the user within a moment or a day? Like, what does that look like?
It's a slightly generous 2 minutes. It's a sort of 3 to 5 minutes, but nothing should take more than 5 minutes. And we don't want people to really spend more than that, in the app. We're not trying to trap people and have them spend 30 minutes, hours in there. We want them ideally try something, see how that feels, see how it fits into what they thought before, see how else they could sort of notice related things, and then go and actually do that noticing in the rest of their day. And so it's definitely, the goal is come in for those 5 minutes you might have doom scrolled instead. I think Mike might tell us about Mike has a favorite place where he thinks people might spend a little time, if they've got a bit of time to spare, on an app, and then do that moment for those few minutes, and then go on with the rest of your day and come back tomorrow and do something different.
One of the moments that we developed for a specific day, we developed a moment for Mother's Day. And the moment was, it started out by just saying, what are you going to do for Mother's Day? And it seemed like it was going to be like, why don't you send your mom some flowers or something? And instead we switched it to ask, do you know anybody who's lost their mother? And why don't you think about how they're feeling today? And why don't you reach out to them? So the 2-minute part is we have you thinking about Mother's Day and what it means to you. And then we're asking you to think a little differently about it and think of other people who might be having a different experience. The reaching out and connecting with someone is outside the, as Beck said, it's outside the app on purpose. And we want you to be going and doing that. And that could take you hours and days and years, hopefully, of follow-up interactions with people. But we're trying to very quickly get you to think differently and go do something is most of the moments.
Exactly. I think get you out of the starting blocks and then something else. We had a moment that we were working on in our beta, which we'll bring back around breaking the ice with your parents, and how to start seeing your parents as people. And some of the feedback, there was, again, a lot of we're trying to make it easy, trying to not leave people with a blank page about, okay, well, what do I go and ask my parents? So there were some conversation prompts, and one of them was along the lines of, what was the first record you bought or a concert that you went to? And someone who'd used the beta version of our app said it actually started a really interesting conversation with my dad, who it's tough to get him to open up about stuff. And we started talking more about music. We now have a shared Spotify playlist. We talk about what else we should add to it. It brings up other memories that he's had, and it started this whole thing that's clearly much longer than 2 minutes. And I think that's the goal, is we do a little, we want to sort of light the fuse, and then it'll go off and go in a great direction somewhere else.
Now, my dad really likes Johnny Mathis, so do I have to create a Spotify? I mean, is that required? Because I don't.
You can skip that moment, Mike.
I can just delete that one off the thing. Is that possible? Okay.
So this does remind me of other products that are coming out in the market now, where there's a proper term for it, which I'm probably not going to get, but I think it's called technology supported, as opposed to you're immersed in the technology and only in the technology, which is really heartening, because I think for a moment there, 2005 to say not so long ago, or even still to this day, there is this obsession and unhealthy addiction or relationship to digital devices and our technologies. So I like that this is a product to just, like you said, Beck, sort of ignite that spark, and then get you back out into the so-called real world of human interaction, as opposed to doing everything within the app. I think that's really important, and I think there's an appetite from consumers out there to have these sorts of experiences that are digitally supported, or whatever the term is. Do you guys know the term that I'm trying to get at here?
We should. I don't know. I'm going to look this up. This is but the spirit of what you're saying very much animated what we had. In fact, at some point in the beta, we said you couldn't do more than one moment a day, which people complained about. But the spirit of it, we tried to maintain. You should come in and have one meaningful experience with the app a day, but not touch it again. And I think this goes exactly in the opposite direction of what a lot of behavioral science is used for in apps. Let's gamify it. Let's get people to, a lot of the force is around. It's a certain. I often think about this as an ungenerous thing I'm going to say, but it's somewhat true, which is there's a part of behavioral science which is treats people a little bit like rats. Let's give them the right amount of cheese at the right amount of time to keep them turning in the wheels. And I think we're allergic to that entire bit. And so anything that you tend to do...
Would you say we're lactose Hey, got a dad joke in.
Pretty soon you'll be listening to Johnny Mathis. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, so you know what it is. It's maybe an app. It's not the Skinnerian. It's not the behaviorist product. It's maybe it's a little bit of Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. Maybe it's a little bit of the humanists built into the experience.
Yeah.
Which makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense. Well, let's project ourselves into the future. What is Pique in 10 years? What is it doing? Does it have the same name? Does it have the same co-founders?
I mean, we'll see what the mastermind says in response to that. But in 10 years, I would love it if people saw Pique as the platform for the self. Maybe that's the place where if you've got ideas that apply to being a human, the way we think about ourselves, the way we interact with other people, you want them on there. When you think about doing something, wanting to work on something in that realm, that's where you come. That it's sort of this meeting place for all of these things. It's the platform for the self, I think, is how I like to imagine it into the future.
I was going to say theme park.
Yeah.
Theme parks, but I guess we're really not aligned. We should probably have talked about this quite a while ago.
Yeah, theme
or
parks,
we could
or
be
book of dad jokes.
That would be great.
Yep, either or.
You know, I think it's all pivots, right? So, I mean, tomorrow you could pivot to dad jokes. You could, who knows what's next, right?
That's the beauty of it.
That's right.
Well, Pique team, it's been a real pleasure. I want to thank you for being the first episode of the BS Buzz in the Market. That name might change. We'll see. We'll see what listeners think of it. But really appreciate you coming on and sharing all that you're doing with Pique. And where can listeners and where can they find you, your work in Pique? Where can they go?
So head to Get Pique. That's GetPique, getpique.app/bunch of BS. And you'll find links to download us there on on Apple's App Store for now. We've got some content available for Android users for now as well. So get in contact with us if you'd like to test out some of our early beta content for Android users. And you can follow us on all of the socials where you might be otherwise doing some doom scrolling that we could interrupt and instead help you do something a little bit different. We're on Get Pique app on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
That's great. Thank you. And I've added a new term, doom scrolling. I don't think I've heard that before. So thanks. If there's anything I take away from this, it's that.
Yeah. I'm glad. Yeah. If nothing else, we've left you with doom scrolling. I wish I could claim credit. Wish I could remember who to give credit to, but it's my favorite new term. It's definitely, I think doom scrolling has become an unfortunate habit and hobby for a lot of us in these times.
I can't wait to use it right after this when I go downstairs to talk with my wife, because it'll.
Can I add one more little thing before we wrap?
Yes, you can, of course.
You might have noticed, and you might think it's because we are just so in sync that we never talked over each other really on this podcast. But if there's a little trick we have. If you'd like to know what it is, you can see a visual of it if you do head to getpique.app/bunch of BS.
Get ready to be mind blown.
Yeah, mind blown by the masterminds. They have a real hack. I mean, I tell you, it really wowed me. So it floored me. So go there and check it out. See how we actually managed to do this conversation with the four of us. Well, thanks again, Pique team. We will chat again soon, and we'll be looking very closely to Pique and all its successes. Cheers. Hey, Nick here once more. A final farewell note before ending. All the show notes, links to papers, resources, and materials mentioned in the episode can be found on the BS podcast page of The Behaviorist, where you can find all episodes and lots of other interesting and easy to apply sciencey stuff. just go to www.behaviorist.biz/BS podcast. The show is edited and co-produced by Laura Christine and Noelle Rain, and all visual artwork, banners, and animated GIFs are created by the talented Iris Deng of dengit.org. That's DENGIT.org. Check it out. And lastly, if you'd like to join me in the mission of spreading the good BS word, remember to rate and review the show on iTunes. A lot of work goes into these episodes, and a little love would go a long way. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember, keep your facts ugly and your hypotheses beautiful.